Billionaire Weds, a janitor's daughter. His family's reaction will shock you. The grand ballroom sparkled with golden chandeliers and lavish floral arrangements. Every detail meticulously curated to scream opulence. Waitstaff moved silently among the guests, serving champagne in crystal flutes as laughter and polite conversation filled the air. It was an event meant to showcase not just wealth but influence. A gala hosted by the Kingston family, whose name carried weight across industries. Alexander Kingston stood near the bar, his tailored tuxedo fitting him like a second skin. But despite the immaculate surroundings, he looked out of place, a faint tension lining his features. His eyes kept darting toward the entrance, and when the heavy double doors finally opened, a hush fell over the crowd. She entered, her modest dress a stark contrast to the sequined gowns and designer suits surrounding her. Sophia Evans looked around the room with quiet confidence, her dark hair pinned back elegantly, her simple silver necklace catching the light. She wasn't used to such grand settings, but her posture was steady, her expression unyielding. Whispers rippled through the room like wildfire. "Isn't that the janitor's daughter?" someone murmured. "She's with Alexander?" another voice asked, barely concealing the shock. Alexander crossed the room in long strides, his face lighting up as he approached Sophia. He offered her his hand, and when she took it, he gave her a reassuring smile. "You look beautiful," he said softly. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady despite the curious stares burning into her. He led her deeper into the room, introducing her to the who's who of high society. Most were polite but distant, their smiles thin, their eyes judgmental. Sophia felt the weight of their scrutiny but refused to let it show. As the evening wore on, they approached Alexander's family. His father, Charles Kingston, a towering figure with a commanding presence. His mother, Evelyn, elegant and composed but with a sharpness in her gaze. And his siblings, Clara and James, standing close by. "Father, mother," Alexander began, his tone formal. "This is Sophia Evans." Charles looked her up and down, his expression unreadable. "Miss Evans," he said curtly, "I've heard a great deal about you." Sophia met his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "All good things, I hope," she replied, a hint of warmth in her voice. "Of course," Evelyn interjected, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Alexander speaks of you often." Clara, Alexander's younger sister, stepped forward with a genuine smile. "It's lovely to meet you, Sophia. I hope my brother has been treating you well." Sophia smiled back, grateful for the small reprieve. "He's been wonderful." James, however, wasn't as welcoming. "So," he said, his tone laced with sarcasm, "what's it like dating a Kingston? Must be quite the upgrade." "James," Alexander warned, his voice low. Sophia didn't flinch. "It's not about upgrades," she said calmly. "Alexander and I care about each other, and that's what matters." James raised an eyebrow but said nothing further, clearly unimpressed. The conversation moved on, but the tension lingered. Sophia could feel Evelyn's gaze on her throughout the evening, assessing, dissecting. She excused herself at one point, slipping away to catch her breath near the balcony. The cool night air was a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere inside. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" a voice said behind her. She turned to see Clara, holding a glass of wine and looking sympathetic. "A little," Sophia admitted, offering a small smile. "But I knew what I was getting into." Clara laughed softly. "Did you? Because I've been part of this family my whole life, and I still get blindsided." Sophia relaxed slightly, appreciating the candidness. "It's not the people," she said. "It's the judgment. The feeling that no matter what I do, it won't be enough." Clara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's their problem, not yours," she said firmly. "You're here because Alexander wants you here, and that's all that should matter." Sophia smiled, her resolve strengthening. "Thank you, Clara." Inside, Charles and Evelyn had retreated to a corner of the room, speaking in hushed tones. "This is unacceptable," Evelyn said, her voice tight. "He can't seriously think this girl is suitable for him." "She's a distraction," Charles replied, his tone cold. Alexander will come to his senses eventually. We just need to make sure he doesn't embarrass the family in the meantime. And if he doesn't? Evelyn asked, her eyes narrowing. Charles didn't answer, but the set of his jaw spoke volumes. As the evening drew to a close, Alexander and Sophia left together, his arm protectively around her shoulders. The car ride back to her apartment was quiet, the weight of the night settling between them. "I'm sorry about my family," Alexander said finally, breaking the silence. "You don't need to apologize for them," Sophia replied. "I knew they wouldn't accept me right away." "It's not right," he said, his voice firm. "They don't see what I see." She reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "What matters is that you do." He looked at her, his expression softening. "I love you, Sophia. No matter what they say, that won't change." She smiled, her heart full despite the challenges ahead. "I love you too." The days that followed the gala were a whirlwind of speculation and gossip. Word of Alexander's relationship with Sophia spread quickly, fueled by whispers among high society and subtle headlines in the local papers. Despite Alexander's attempts to shield Sophia from the noise, it was impossible to avoid completely. Sophia returned to her job at the library, where she worked part-time while finishing her degree. Her co-workers, usually kind and chatty, were suddenly quieter, their curiosity palpable. At first, Sophia ignored the glances and hushed conversations, but it wasn't long before a colleague approached her during lunch. "So, Sophia," the woman began, her tone light but probing, "what's it like dating someone like Alexander Kingston?" Sophia hesitated, unsure how to answer. "He's just Alexander," she said finally. "He's kind and thoughtful, like anyone else." The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. Kind and thoughtful doesn't usually come with private jets and family fortunes. Sophia forced a smile, but the conversation left her unsettled. She had always known that being with Alexander would come with challenges, but the scrutiny was more intense than she had imagined. At the Kingston estate, the atmosphere was equally charged. Evelyn was busy organizing a charity luncheon, but her thoughts were consumed by Alexander's relationship. She paced the drawing room, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she spoke to Charles. "We need to do something," she said, her voice sharp. "This girl is completely out of her depth. Alexander is blind to it now, but he'll regret this decision." Charles sighed, setting down the financial report he had been reading. "And what do you propose we do?" "Forbidding him will only push him further toward her." "We don't need to forbid anything," Evelyn replied. "We just need to make her uncomfortable enough to leave on her own." Charles frowned but didn't argue. He trusted Evelyn's instincts when it came to family matters, even if her methods were often ruthless. Alexander, oblivious to his parents' scheming, was focused on making Sophia feel at home in his world. He invited her to dinner at an upscale restaurant, hoping to distract her from the mounting pressure. The setting was intimate, the lighting warm and inviting, but Sophia couldn't shake her unease. "Are you okay?" Alexander asked as their meals arrived. Sophia hesitated, then nodded. "I'm fine. It's just a lot. The attention, the judgment. I don't know if I'm cut out for this." "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," Alexander said firmly. "You're here because I love you, not because of their approval." She looked at him, his sincerity calming her nerves. "I just don't want to be the reason you're at odds with your family." "They'll come around," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "They just need time." Back at the Kingston estate, Evelyn put her plan into motion. She arranged a formal family dinner and insisted that Alexander bring Sophia. It was presented as a gesture of goodwill, but Alexander was skeptical. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Sophia asked as they drove to the estate. "They said they want to get to know you," Alexander replied, though his grip on the steering wheel tightened. "I'll be right there with you. If it gets uncomfortable, we'll leave." The dinner started cordially enough. The table was set with fine china and crystal glasses, the dining room lit by a massive chandelier. Clara greeted Sophia warmly, while James offered a lukewarm hello. Evelyn and Charles were polite but distant, their smiles thin and their questions carefully veiled. "So, Sophia," Evelyn began, her tone pleasant but probing. What are your aspirations? I imagine dating Alexander has opened up new opportunities for you. Sophia met her gaze evenly. My goals haven't changed. I'm finishing my degree in education and hope to work with underserved communities. How noble, Evelyn replied, though there was a slight edge to her voice. And Alexander, how do you see Sophia fitting into your life? The responsibilities of being a Kingston can be demanding. Alexander set down his fork, his jaw tightening. Sophia isn't defined by her ability to fit into anything, mother. She's her own person, and that's why I love her. The tension at the table was palpable, but Sophia remained composed. She answered questions thoughtfully, refusing to let the subtle jabs rattle her. Still, the evening took its toll, and by the time they left, she felt drained. In the car ride home, Sophia stared out the window, her thoughts swirling. They're never going to accept me, are they? She said quietly. They don't matter, Alexander replied, his voice firm. We matter. Don't let them get into your head. Sophia nodded, but doubt lingered. She wanted to believe him, but the evening had made it clear just how deeply entrenched the family's prejudices were. As the weeks passed, Sophia threw herself into her studies and her work, finding solace in routine. She refused to let the Kingston family's disapproval define her, but their influence loomed large. Invitations to events became more frequent, each one a test of her resilience. At one such event, a lavish charity auction, Sophia found herself cornered by James. You're holding up surprisingly well, he said, his tone condescending. I expected you to crack by now. Disappointed? Sophia replied, her voice steady. James smirked. Not at all. I admire your persistence. But let's be honest, you don't belong here. Sophia met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. Belonging isn't about wealth or status. It's about character. And if that's what you value, maybe you're the one who doesn't belong. For a moment, James looked taken aback. Then he laughed, though it lacked genuine humor. Touché. Sophia walked away, her head held high, but the encounter left her shaken. She knew she had the strength to stand up to the family, but the constant battle was wearing her down. Sophia spent the days after the charity auction reflecting on James's words. His veiled insults were nothing new, but this time, they lingered in her mind longer than she wanted to admit. She wasn't sure if it was exhaustion or frustration, but for the first time, she felt the weight of trying to prove herself to people who had already decided her worth. One evening, after finishing a shift at the library, Sophia returned to her modest apartment to find Alexander waiting for her outside. He was leaning against his sleek black car, his suit slightly rumpled and his expression pensive. Alexander, she said, surprised. What are you doing here? I wanted to see you, he replied, pushing himself off the car and walking toward her. I could tell you were upset after the auction. She unlocked her door and let him in, dropping her bag on the kitchen counter. It's nothing I can't handle, she said, trying to sound confident. Alexander frowned. You don't have to handle it alone, Sophia. I know my family can be difficult. That's putting it mildly, she said with a faint smile. But I knew what I was signing up for. Maybe you shouldn't have to, he said suddenly, his voice thick with frustration. They're the problem, not you. And if they can't see that, then maybe it's time I stop trying to change their minds. Sophia looked at him, her heart softening. You don't have to choose between me and your family, Alexander. I don't want to be the reason you lose them. You're not, he said firmly. They're the ones making this difficult. Not you. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. We'll get through this. Together. At the Kingston estate, Evelyn and Charles were doubling down on their efforts to disrupt the relationship. Evelyn had enlisted the help of her closest friends, other socialites who thrived on gossip and manipulation. Together, they hatched a plan to publicly embarrass Sophia at an upcoming gala, ensuring her humiliation would be enough to drive her away for good. Clara overheard part of their conversation as she passed by the drawing room. She paused, her stomach twisting as she realized what her mother was planning. Clara had always been the more empathetic of the siblings, and while she didn't know Sophia well, She admired her resilience. That evening, Clara called Alexander, her voice hushed. "I need to talk to you. It's important." Alexander listened intently as Clara explained what she had overheard. His anger simmered just below the surface, but he kept his voice calm. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "I'll handle it." "Be careful, Alex," Clara warned. "They're not used to being challenged." The night of the gala arrived, and the tension was palpable. Sophia had chosen a simple but elegant gown, her confidence bolstered by Alexander's unwavering support. As they entered the grand venue, heads turned, and the familiar whispers began again. Evelyn greeted them with a practiced smile, her eyes sharp as they took in Sophia's appearance. "You look lovely, dear," she said, her tone dripping with insincerity. "Thank you," Sophia replied, her voice steady. She refused to let Evelyn's demeanor rattle her. The evening progressed smoothly at first, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She noticed Evelyn and a group of women glancing her way and whispering, their smiles too wide to be genuine. When it was time for the evening's speeches, Sophia's unease grew. As one of the speakers, a prominent philanthropist, took the stage, he began recounting a story about unexpected guests in high society. His tone was light, almost humorous, but his words were laced with thinly veiled jabs that mirrored the gossip circulating about Sophia. Sophia felt her cheeks burn as the crowd chuckled at his anecdotes. Alexander's grip on her hand tightened, his jaw clenched in silent anger. When the speech ended, Evelyn and her friends applauded enthusiastically, their smug expressions confirming Sophia's suspicions. "I need some air," Sophia whispered to Alexander, her voice trembling. He nodded, standing with her as they left the ballroom. Outside, she took a deep breath, willing herself to stay composed. "I'm so sorry, Sophia," Alexander said, his voice full of guilt. "I should have stopped this." "This isn't your fault," she said, though her voice wavered. "They were always going to find a way to make me feel small." "You are not small," he said fiercely. "You are stronger than any of them." She looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Sometimes it feels like I'm fighting a battle I can't win." "You don't have to fight alone," he said. "I'm with you. Always." Inside the ballroom, Clara confronted her mother, her voice low but firm. "That was cruel, even for you." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," Clara said. "You planned this, and you should be ashamed." "Clara, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Clara interrupted. "You care more about appearances than your own son's happiness. But guess what? It's not working. Sophia is stronger than you think." Evelyn said nothing, her expression hardening. Clara walked away, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. As Alexander and Sophia left the gala early, a determined look crossed Alexander's face. "Enough is enough," he said. "It's time I make it clear where I stand." Sophia looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. "I trust you," she said simply, and for the first time, she truly believed they could face whatever came next. Together. The car ride back to Sophia's apartment was quiet, the weight of the evening settling heavily between them. Alexander's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw clenched as he replayed the events of the gala in his mind. "I can't keep watching them treat you this way," he said finally, breaking the silence. "It's not fair, and it's not right." Sophia turned to him, her voice calm but firm. "I knew this wouldn't be easy, Alexander, but I don't want you to feel like you have to choose between me and your family." "They're making that choice for me," he replied, his tone resolute. "If they can't accept the person I love, that's their loss." She reached out and placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "We'll get through this," she said softly, "but let's do it together. I don't want you fighting this battle on your own." He nodded, his grip on the wheel loosening slightly. Together, he agreed. Meanwhile, back at the Kingston estate, Evelyn sat in the drawing room with Charles, her frustration boiling over. "He's slipping away from us," she said, pacing back and forth. "That girl is driving a wedge between Alexander and this family." Charles sighed, setting down the glass of scotch he had been nursing. "He's a grown man, Evelyn. We can't control him forever, but we can guide him, she insisted. He needs to see reason before it's too late. And if he doesn't? Charles asked, his voice calm but pointed. Evelyn stopped pacing, her lips pressing into a thin line. Then he'll have to face the consequences. Charles said nothing, but the tension in the room was palpable. For the first time, he wondered if Evelyn's determination to protect their family's reputation might cost them something far more important. The next day, Sophia returned to the library, eager to immerse herself in the comforting routine of work. But even there, the whispers followed her. A colleague approached her cautiously, holding a tablet with a headline displayed on the screen. Billionaire's fiancé faces scrutiny. Can she handle high society? Sophia stared at the headline, a sinking feeling in her chest. The article was filled with thinly veiled insults, questioning her background, her education, and even her intentions. It was clear that someone had leaked information about her to the press, and she had a strong suspicion of who was behind it. "Are you okay?" her colleague asked, her voice tinged with concern. Sophia forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I'll be fine," she said. "Thank you." But as she returned to her desk, the weight of the article pressed heavily on her. She had expected judgment, but seeing it laid out so publicly was something else entirely. At the same time, Alexander was meeting with Clara at a cafe in the city. She had texted him earlier, insisting that they talk. "I'm worried about you," Clara said, her voice low. "Mother isn't going to back down, Alex. If anything, she's doubling down." "I don't care," Alexander said, his tone sharp. "She can plot all she wants, but I'm not going to let her dictate my life." Clara sighed, stirring her coffee absently. "I admire your determination, but you need to be careful. This isn't just about Sophia anymore. Mother is worried about the family's image, and she's willing to do whatever it takes to protect it. Then she'll have to deal with the consequences," Alexander replied, "because I'm done playing by her rules." Clara reached across the table and placed a hand on his. "Just promise me you'll be careful," she said softly. "I don't want to see you get hurt." He nodded, his expression softening. "I promise." That evening, Alexander visited Sophia at her apartment, bringing dinner and a bouquet of her favorite flowers. She smiled when she opened the door, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "You didn't have to do this," she said as she let him in. "I wanted to," he replied, setting the food on the table. "You've had a rough couple of days. I thought you could use a break." They ate together, the tension of the past few days easing as they talked about everything except the Kingston family. For a few hours, it was just the two of them, and Sophia was reminded of why she had fallen in love with Alexander in the first place. After dinner, as they sat on the couch, Alexander turned to her, his expression serious. "I've been thinking," he said, "about how we can move forward." Sophia tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" "I want to be with you, Sophia," he said, "but I don't want us to keep living under the shadow of my family's disapproval. We need to take control of the narrative." "How?" she asked, her brow furrowing. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "I want us to go public with our story. Not just as a couple, but as partners. I want people to see the real you, not the version my family is trying to paint." Sophia considered his words carefully. It was a bold move, and it would undoubtedly draw more attention to her. But it was also a chance to take back some of the power she felt she had lost. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's do it." In the days that followed, Alexander and Sophia began planning how to tell their story. They worked with a trusted journalist to craft a thoughtful article, one that highlighted Sophia's accomplishments, her resilience, and the genuine love they shared. The piece was scheduled to run in a prominent lifestyle magazine, and both of them knew it would spark a firestorm. As the publication date approached, Evelyn caught wind of their plans. Furious, she confronted Alexander at the Kingston estate. "What are you thinking?" she demanded. "Do you have any idea what this will do to our family's reputation?" "This isn't about the family," Alexander replied calmly. "It's about me and Sophia. And if you can't support us, then that's your choice. But I'm not going to let you control my life." Evelyn stared at him, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "You're making a mistake," she said finally. "No," he replied. "The mistake would be letting you drive away the best thing that's ever happened to me." The day the article was published, Sophia woke up to a flurry of notifications. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages, emails, and social media alerts. She hesitated for a moment before opening the first message, a text from a friend. "I saw the article. You're amazing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her heart raced as she clicked the link to the magazine's website. The headline read, "Love Beyond Boundaries. Billionaire heir and his fiancée share their story." Below it was a picture of her and Alexander, taken during one of their rare quiet moments together. The article was beautifully written, painting a picture of their relationship that was honest and heartfelt. It highlighted Sophia's intelligence, her work at the library, and her aspirations to make a difference in underserved communities. It also touched on Alexander's struggles with his family's expectations and his decision to follow his heart. For a moment, Sophia felt a surge of pride. This was her story told on her terms. But as she scrolled through the comments section, her optimism began to waver. The reactions were mixed. Many people praised her resilience and cheered for their love story, but others weren't as kind. "Gold digger," one comment read. "She's just after his money," said another. The vitriol stung, but Sophia reminded herself that she couldn't let strangers' opinions define her. She closed the article and took a deep breath, bracing herself for the day ahead. At the Kingston estate, the reaction to the article was explosive. Evelyn paced the length of the drawing room, her face flushed with anger. "Did you see this?" she demanded, holding up the magazine. "He's dragged our family name through the mud." Charles looked up from his newspaper, his expression calm. "It's not as bad as you're making it out to be. The article is well written, and it makes Alexander look admirable. It makes him look reckless," Evelyn snapped. "And that girl, she's playing him, Charles." "I know it." Clara, who had been quietly reading in the corner, spoke up. "Maybe she's not. Did you ever consider that she might actually love him?" Evelyn turned to her, her eyes narrowing. "You're too naive, Clara. You don't understand what's at stake here." "No," Clara said, standing her ground. "I think you're the one who doesn't understand. This isn't about you or the family name. It's about Alexander being happy." Evelyn's mouth tightened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned on her heel and left the room, muttering under her breath. Alexander and Sophia spent the day fielding calls and messages from friends and acquaintances. Most were supportive, but a few were pointedly critical. By the evening, they were exhausted but relieved that the worst seemed to be over. That relief was short-lived. The following day, a tabloid published a scathing rebuttal to the article, filled with speculation about Sophia's motives and sensationalized stories about her past. The headline screamed, "Billionaire's fiancé. Is she too good to be true?" Sophia's heart sank as she read the article. It twisted small, inconsequential details of her life into something ugly and manipulative. The comments this time were even harsher, filled with accusations and insults. Alexander found her sitting on the couch, her phone clutched tightly in her hands. "Sophia," he said gently, sitting beside her. "What's wrong?" She handed him the phone without a word. He read the article, his expression darkening with every sentence. "This is garbage," he said finally, setting the phone down. "They're just trying to stir up drama." "But people believe it," Sophia said, her voice trembling. "No matter what we say or do, they're always going to see me as someone who doesn't belong." Alexander took her hands in his gaze steady. "You belong with me. That's all that matters." She nodded, but the doubt lingered. In the weeks that followed, Sophia and Alexander worked to counter the negative press. They gave interviews to reputable outlets, focusing on the work they were doing together to support underserved communities. Slowly but surely, public opinion began to shift. People saw Sophia not as a gold digger, but as a strong, intelligent woman with a vision. But within the Kingston family, tensions remained high. Evelyn continued to scheme, though her efforts were increasingly futile. Clara grew more vocal in her support of Alexander and Sophia, challenging her mother at every turn. One evening, as the family sat down to dinner, Alexander made an announcement. "Sophia and I are getting married," he said. his voice calm but firm. The room fell silent. Evelyn set down her fork, her expression icy. "Are you sure that's wise?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Alexander replied. "And I'd like to think my family would support me." Charles sighed, rubbing his temples. "Do what you want, Alexander. But don't expect us to clean up the mess if things go wrong." "I'm not asking for your approval," Alexander said. "But I would like your blessing." Clara smiled at him, her support clear. James, for once, stayed quiet. Evelyn said nothing, her face a mask of disapproval. As Alexander and Sophia planned their wedding, they faced obstacles at every turn. Vendors mysteriously canceled contracts, and venues suddenly became unavailable. It was clear that Evelyn was pulling strings behind the scenes, but Alexander refused to let her win. "We'll figure it out," he told Sophia. "No matter what happens, we're getting married." Sophia nodded, her resolve strengthening. "Together," she said. The days leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Despite Evelyn's subtle attempts to sabotage their plans, Alexander and Sophia pressed forward with determination. They found a beautiful venue, a serene garden tucked away on the outskirts of the city, and worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life. The guest list was small and intimate, reflecting their desire to focus on what truly mattered. But the tension within the Kingston family was impossible to ignore. One evening, Clara visited Sophia at her apartment, bringing a bottle of wine and an apologetic smile. "I wanted to check on you," Clara said, settling onto the couch. "It can't be easy dealing with my mother right now." Sophia sighed, pouring them each a glass. "She's certainly persistent," she said, trying to keep her tone light. "But we're not letting her stop us." Clara nodded, her expression serious. "Good, because I think what you and Alexander have is worth fighting for." Sophia smiled, touched by Clara's support. "Thank you. That means a lot." As they sipped their wine, Clara hesitated before speaking again. "I overheard something yesterday," she said carefully. "My mother is planning to make a scene at the wedding." Sophia's heart sank. "What kind of scene?" "She didn't say exactly," Clara replied. "But she was talking about how this marriage will never last, and how she needed to prove a point." Sophia set down her glass, her hands trembling slightly. "Why can't she just let us be happy?" "Because she's afraid," Clara said simply. "Afraid of losing control of change. But that's her problem, not yours." Sophia nodded, her resolve hardening. "She's not going to ruin this for us." Meanwhile, Alexander confronted his parents at the estate. He found Evelyn in the study, going over the details for another charity event. She looked up when he entered, her expression guarded. "Alexander," she said coolly, "what brings you here?" "We need to talk," he replied, closing the door behind him. "I know what you're planning, and it needs to stop." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't play coy, mother," Alexander said, his tone sharp. "Clara told me everything. You're planning to disrupt the wedding." Evelyn's expression didn't waver. "I'm only trying to protect you, Alexander. This marriage is a mistake, and deep down, you know it." "No," he said firmly. "The mistake would be letting you dictate my life. I love Sophia, and nothing you do is going to change that." Evelyn sighed, setting down her pen. "You're making a choice you'll regret." "The only regret I have," Alexander said, his voice steady, "is that you can't see how much she means to me. But that's your loss, not mine." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Evelyn alone in the study. As the wedding day approached, Sophia found herself leaning on her father more than ever. He had always been her rock, offering quiet wisdom and unwavering support. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch of her childhood home. "The scrutiny, the judgment. It's exhausting." Her father placed a hand on hers, his grip warm and steady. "You've always been strong, Sophia. Stronger than you realize. And you're not doing this alone. Alexander loves you, and so do I. That's all that matters." She smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Dad. Now," he said with a twinkle in his eye, "let's focus on the good. You're marrying the man you love. Don't let anyone take that joy away from you." The wedding day dawned bright and clear. The garden venue bathed in golden sunlight. Guests began arriving, their excitement palpable. Alexander stood at the altar, his nerves soothed by the sight of the flowers, the music, and the loved ones gathered to celebrate. Sophia arrived shortly after, her simple but elegant dress flowing around her as her father escorted her down the aisle. The sight of her took Alexander's breath away, and for a moment, all the tension and drama faded into the background. But Evelyn, seated near the front with Charles, was visibly tense. Her expression was unreadable, but Clara, seated beside her, could sense the storm brewing. As the ceremony began, the officiant's words filled the air, and Sophia and Alexander exchanged vows that were heartfelt and emotional. Just as the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, Evelyn stood up. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Alexander's jaw tightened. He turned to his mother, his eyes blazing. "Don't," he said, his voice low but firm. Evelyn hesitated, her gaze flickering to Sophia. For a moment, it seemed like she might say something, but then she sat down, her expression unreadable. The ceremony continued, and when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted into cheers. Alexander and Sophia kissed, their love shining brighter than any shadow cast by the day's events. The cheers from the guests filled the garden as Alexander and Sophia walked hand in hand down the aisle, their smiles radiant despite the lingering tension. For that moment, they felt untouchable, surrounded by the love of their closest friends and supporters. Even Clara joined them in their joy, embracing Sophia tightly as she whispered, "Welcome to the family." Evelyn, however, remained seated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Charles leaned over to her, his voice low. "It's done now. Maybe it's time to let go." She didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the newlyweds as they disappeared into the crowd. The reception was a lively affair, filled with laughter, heartfelt speeches, and the clinking of glasses. Sophia's father stood to give a toast, his voice filled with emotion as he addressed the room. "Sophia has always been my pride and joy," he began, his eyes misty. "She's strong, intelligent, and kind, everything I could ever hope for in a daughter. And now, seeing her with Alexander, I know she's found someone who loves her for exactly who she is. That's all a father could ever ask for." The crowd erupted into applause, and Sophia hugged her father tightly, her heart full. When it was Alexander's turn to speak, he stood confidently, his gaze sweeping over the guests before landing on Sophia. "Sophia has changed my life in ways I never imagined," he said, his voice steady. "She's shown me what it means to love selflessly, to stand firm in the face of adversity, and to believe in something bigger than yourself. I'm the luckiest man in the world to call her my wife." The room burst into cheers again, and Sophia felt tears prick at her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly at peace. Later that evening, as the festivities wound down, Evelyn approached Alexander. He was standing near the edge of the garden, watching as Sophia danced with Clara and a few other guests. Her laughter carried on the breeze, a sound that filled him with joy. "Alexander," Evelyn said, her tone hesitant. He turned to her, his expression guarded. "Mother," she sighed, her usual poise giving way to a rare moment of vulnerability. "I may not agree with your choices, but I can see how much she means to you." "She means everything to me," he replied. "I just wish you could see her the way I do." Evelyn was silent for a long moment before finally nodding. "I'll try," she said softly. "For your sake." It wasn't a full acceptance, but it was a start. Alexander gave her a small, grateful smile. "That's all I ask." As the night came to an end, Alexander and Sophia left the venue hand in hand, the sound of their guests' cheers echoing behind them. They climbed into the car waiting for them, ready to start their new life together. In the quiet of the car, Sophia leaned her head on Alexander's shoulder, a contented smile on her face. "We did it," she said softly. He kissed her forehead, his heart swelling with love. "We did." In the weeks that followed, the couple settled into their new life, finding joy in the simple moments, cooking dinner together, exploring the city, and dreaming about the future. The public scrutiny slowly faded, replaced by stories of their work to support underserved communities. Their love story became a symbol of resilience and authenticity, inspiring others to look beyond the surface. Even within the Kingston family, small changes began to take root. Clara visited them often, her bond with Sophia growing stronger. Charles, though reserved, began showing subtle signs of respect for his son's choices. And Evelyn, while still distant, made an effort to be more civil, her sharp edges softening over time. One evening, as they sat on their balcony watching the sunset, Alexander took Sophia's hand in his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked. She smiled, her eyes sparkling. "Every day, and I wouldn't change a thing." "Neither would I," he said, pulling her close. "You're my everything, Sophia, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it." She leaned into him, her heart full. Together, they had faced the odds and come out stronger. And as they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, they knew their story was only just beginning.